Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Hernandez. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I am the Director of Career Advancement for the Wharton MBA for Executives program based in San Francisco. So I've been doing this for 10 years. A lot of folks are still surprised that, that we have a campus in San Francisco. A lot of local people, when I tell them I work for the University of Pennsylvania, say, okay, do you work from home? Do you commute? Or you've been working virtually for quite some time? No, we actually have quite a nice campus right here in San Francisco along the Embarcadero. In fact, it's my background. We're right there by the bridge. And so I've been at this for about 10 years now. I support 200 resident first and second year executive MBA students that attend classes on the weekends. Now, over the last year, we've moved our program to virtual. We are pretty excited. Starting this Friday, we're coming back in small groups. So we are physically coming back to the campus now, which is really exciting for us. So that's a little bit about my role here. You're going to learn from the presentation a little bit more about our students, but in general, they have about 10 to 12 years of experience, a lot of middle managers to directors. We do have some VP level and senior VP students. And they have a wide range of backgrounds from engineering to their physicians, attorneys. Many of them already are in business and they're looking to kind of move up. So a lot of diversity in our populations of the students that I support. So let's dive into it. I'm going to talk about one of our programs called the Job Search Action Groups. Our acronym is JSAGs. And it's become one of our main go-to programs since I've been here. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it came about and how it's executed. We like to call it a sort of a WEMBA job search. WEMBA is our acronym for MBA for Executives here, Wharton MBA for Executives. We've kind of sort of created a workflow process. My colleague Dawn Graham is here and she'll be talking to you next, actually talking about her book Switchers. But the two of us have kind of come up with this, this workflow we execute with our students when it comes to job search. So I'll talk a little bit more about it. Let me dive right in. So when I arrived, one thing I want to say, we number our classes. We number our classes. So we just admitted class 47. I started with class 35. So that gives you a sense of how long I've been here. We just graduated class 45, thus 10 years of classes. So each cohort is numbered since the executive program started here at Wharton. And so I started with class 35. So class 35 to class 37 was when I began, and this was pre-job search action group. So I want to talk a little bit about why it was important to do the job search action groups. First, when I came into it, low student satisfaction with career support in San Francisco. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? And so I'm not going to get into student satisfaction. That's not what this presentation is, but one aspect of it is obviously job search. There was our keynote speaker yesterday made that comment, which I could totally relate to, saying that, hey, the professors actually think the students are here to learn something, whereas 90% of them want to get a job. Well, yes, we're very academic here at the University of Pennsylvania for sure, but here at Wharton, we are well aware that our students want to take the next step in their career. So it's important to address that. And at the time, the job market was coming back in 2011, but it had been pretty flat. It was still pretty flat. 2010, 2009 were pretty dismal. It's coming back, but it was still pretty flat when I arrived. Fewer than half of our students were making the career changes that they wanted. So again, it's a very high profile program. Our students are very achievement oriented. And so they want to move up. They want to move up. They want to go vertical. They want to change industries. They want to change function. They want to start companies. They want to make changes. And so it wasn't happening at the pace, and they didn't feel like they were getting the support to facilitate that. So, when I sort of surveyed them sort of at the intake when I arrived, about 70% of them desired career change, right at the point of entry. What we were offered at the time was, the more of the non-structured one-on-one approach to coaching, which is what executive programs are all about, what I was hired to do. My prior background was in executive search and executive coaching. That's what I did, and that's why they hired me. But it's a very non-structured approach. So a lot of our students were migrating towards on-campus recruiting, along with our full-time student counterparts. They were just attracted to it, and a good 30%, 36% of the population were participating in it. But there's a problem there, because we had a very low yield on success. So it wasn't the way most of them were able to get jobs. So that was very disappointing. So this is the structured approach that we're looking for, and we're not getting the results. What's going on? What's going on, career team? So I had to address that. So what I thought I'd do is, well, first of all, like, why are they not? I sort of intuitively knew why, but I had to really kind of examine that. So, why are they not being successful with on-campus recruiting? Well, first of all, it's kind of a solo process. They're targeting 3 to 5 year full-time students. Our students have, as I just said, roughly 12 years of experience. Most of the full-time students have summer internships. That gives them certainly a leg up with some of these companies. Our students cannot do summer internships. They're employed. There's a lot of our students are H-1 sponsored with visas. They don't have time. They work full time. Many have, families, and it's a very rigorous program. So there's not a whole lot of free time to do, stuff around case prep and things like that. So they were just getting outperformed in the interview process. There's misalignment with compensation. Many of them are already making over 200K or in the high ones. We haven't had the international trips over the last year, but on-campus recruiting season coincides with our international trips, and less time for the on-campus recruiting type of networking that the clubs do, and also at the time they physically would have to go to Philadelphia. We're in San Francisco. They physically would have to go to Philadelphia. So there's just a lot of cards stacked against them in that process. Just wasn't working. It was very obvious why the yield was so low. I had to think of something else. So what did I want to come up with? So, well, let's think about the factors. So I surveyed them. Why are you so attracted to on-campus recruiting if you're not getting the results? Why? Why is this so important to you? Well, they like the structure. Can I replicate structure? Sure, I can come up with a program that can replicate the job search structure. They like the idea it was a process, right? They go into the portal. You got your resume, your cover letter workshops. There's a system in place. I can jump in and I can I know what's ahead of me. So could I create a process for them? Sure, absolutely. There's a timeline. It's during the fall. I can prepare for the fall. I can do all my prep over the summer. I can network. I can go to information sessions. And then the timeline is the fall. And then you start your new job after you graduate. So they like the idea of a timeline that they could get their head around, not some sort of a random process. So could I create a timeline? Yes, I can. Many of them were in transition. So they saw, getting into consulting or banking or things like that, representing both a functional and an industry switch. Could I help support their transition outside of the on-campus recruiting process? Yes, absolutely, we could do that. Well, top brands, hey, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, things like companies like that. I think at the time, I think Google was, some of the tech brands were also involved in on-campus recruiting back then. They don't do it now necessarily, but back then they were doing it. So, hey, access to these top brands. And could we replicate that? Absolutely can. Now, getting into consulting investment banking, not so much through the job search action group process. However, we do have students that do get into consulting sort of off cycle. So question mark there. But what I could offer in addition to all this stuff is group support. You're not going it alone. You have a team behind you. You have a facilitator coach there. You have your classmates. You have accountability. We're on a schedule. We show up to meetings where we're checking in with each other. So there's accountability. And there's curriculum. And get into the curriculum I created around this. So to offset these things, we had to create a structure that would do this. And so what that program is known as is the Job Search Action Groups, better known as JSAGs. And it's become a very popular acronym that students look forward to in their second year. So I'm going to kind of break down what that looks like. So I'm going to take a second just to kind of look at chat real quick. Okay, my bio was posted. There's obviously we're going to backload for questions at the end, but I just wanted to take a little breath here if anybody's got a question or a comment. Or is anyone doing something similar to this? Okay. Okay, we got it here. Feel free to type in questions. Okay, let's move on and I'll kind of check. All right, so let's break it down into pieces. So what does the structure look like? Well, we work in small groups of 8 to 10 students per group. Now, for scaling reasons, luckily there's a coach, and you're going to see his name come up because he kind of co-wrote our curriculum with me. I've been working with him for years. I've known him. He's a well-known Silicon Valley coach, and so I've been able to bring him on part-time to help facilitate these programs. So I kind of trained him on what we're trying to get, and he's been able to do that. So we're able to scale these programs. So we get roughly about 20 students per session, and I'll talk about what those sessions look like in a minute. But I try to keep it to 8 to 10 students. When you kind of exceed 10 students, then it sort of becomes the facilitator lecturing. And I want to get away from that. I want it to be sort of group sharing. And at some point, I'll talk about concepts. They'll refer to me, but really, it's a lot of it is the students supporting one another. So as I said, a group facilitator, me and an outside coach, so I can scale it. And it's targeted on advanced search. So there's a lot of pre-work involved, and there's a lot of front-end assessment involved. In fact, I'd be reticent to accept people into the group that haven't already done a fair amount of one-on-one coaching. So targeting is very important, and a lot of that, sort of that preliminary targeting, because it is more focused on advanced search. It's very action-oriented. It's not lecture. It's a lot of group support, but we're trying to get students to move from one level to the next, kind of keep them going through a flow that you're going to see. But it is all about action. How many interviews did you have this week? How did they go? What worked? What didn't work? How's your sourcing looking? Trying to kind of get them through a process once they get that first round to really work as a team to get them to that second round. And, so there's a borderline between putting too much pressure on them, but there's also, trying to get them to move to the next level and assessing. If they're not, looking at the reasons why they're not. So really focus on results. We augment it by one-on-one coach. They can continue to do one-on-one coaching during the program. And in addition to having me as their coach, they get this additional coach. If you participate in JSAG, then you get to work with this other coach to get a different perspective as well. So that's usually very, very helpful. And it also happens about the time they start with their executive coaching program that we started in the second year. So they're getting a lot of, so on top of getting, there's 3 different coaches they're working with, they're also getting the support, structured support from their classmates and a team. So it really kind of just helps create this really positive momentum for them. So this is kind of how I package it to the students. Opportunity to create higher impact, structured results, oriented team approach to job search. We offered in terms 4, 5, and 6, which is their entire second year. Well, the reason we do it for second years, even though a lot of first years would want to do this, again, going back to what I said earlier, they have to be prepared to be successful. So we want them to spend time in that first year doing that discovery, that due diligence, and figuring out who they are and what they want to do next, and validating their targets. The first few sections you're going to see when I show the roadmap for the program is targeting. And what I mean by targeting, it's validating, not only identifying those targets, what role do I want? What types of companies do I want to work for? What is my long-term career trajectory? Assigning, we actually use data to assign what is the probability that I'm going to be successful based on what I'm bringing to the table now. What gaps do I have? So validation is super important. And it also, when they sort of go through that assessment, it might inspire them to look at pivots that make more sense. I see there's a chat question. What assessments do you use in the pre-work? That's a really great question. So there's formal assessment. We do use things like Career Leader, of course. But there's a validation tool that we have in the Job Search Manifesto, which is our workbook, which is the curriculum we're going to talk about in a second, where we sort of assign values. Now, one could do it. It's sort of a matrix spreadsheet that I created a long time ago, where you kind of break down your values, what kind of people do I want to work with? What kind of culture am I looking for? What superpowers and skills do I want to use? What kind of compensation am I after? We kind of break down those categories, and then we sort of, as you go through your discovery process, how many of these things are sort of being validated. So it's sort of a manual assessment we have in, as part of the Job Search Manifesto workbook, including, formal assessments such as career leader, such as strength finder. We can factor in the MBTI and sort of package it as such. But I think the best assessment is a lot of that front end networking that they're doing. Again, what we really, Dawn can confirm that when she does her talking in a little while about the value of that whole discovery and the data they collect from there. So hopefully I answered your question. Roughly about 70% of the students that go through the JSAG program that are consistent find success while still students here. They're about 1.5 hour sessions that we do, and I'll talk about when we schedule them. And we do about 8 of those sessions over a 14-week term. We cover categories such as networking, job sourcing, strategy, brand, all the stuff that you guys talk about, that we talk about individually, we sort of package this, right? And it's a great opportunity. We get in the first year, these workshops, we give these workshops to them. It's a great opportunity that in the second year, now you're getting a refresher and it's packaged in a flow. And, what you're seeing is this advertisement, that I did for the current class, which they were at the time, the meetings were virtual. I think they're going to stay virtual for a while. We're going to see how things play out with some of the students that we're bringing back to campus and whether or not we can do, some live virtual mix. But right now it's all virtual. And of course, you're working with the Job Search Manifesto. We create WhatsApp groups per cohort where they share leads, where they post jobs, where they have dialogue. Hey, I've got this interview coming up. And, obviously they're going to, say, hey, can we set up a mock interview with you, Steve? But hey, maybe I have some questions. Who's worked at these companies? What insights can you give me? What leads can you share? So, it's a whole package. And then, some of the remarks that students have made about the program is they love the structure. I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of the Wharton students they love structure. They love process. They love data. The group support has been vital. In the networking on, refining that networking pitch and having your peers review it. LinkedIn profile, which Joseph just talked about, to have all of your peers assess your profile and your resume, and then to do mock interviews. And again, refresher of some of the concepts we've covered earlier in their time here. Wondering if you find that participants stick with it through the whole semester. Great question. Barbara knows. She knows how this works. I would say, I'm going to talk about that in a second, about 60% of them. I'd say, Dawn, I don't know if you want to jump in about your students, but I a good 60% of my students will be really consistent. Most will, maybe they won't go to all 8 sessions. They might do 5 or 6, and sort of things come up. But what they'll do is they'll jump into the next round. I'm pretty liberal about letting them, if they did term 4, okay, well, if you, for whatever reason, had to miss a lot in term 4 because of life, job, what have you, maybe I'll let you come into term 5 if you're really engaged. So overall, I think it's pretty consistent participation, but I would have to say, if I had to give it a number, I'd say about 60% are really consistent, stay through, go through all 8 sessions. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about process a little bit. When do we meet? So our students are in class Fridays and Saturdays. So we generally meet, I sort of, when we were on campus, Saturday mornings at 7:30 was JSAG. So get them in that mindset. We're all going to meet early. Let's bring breakfast, coffee, and let's bang it out Saturday morning. Obviously that changed with COVID. So we were, on a weeknight in evening schedule. Probably we'd start, 5:30, 6 o'clock after work. So we're going to see how that goes. For now, we're still on the weeknights. But we did also do Saturday mornings depending on the student needs. So I'm pretty flexible there, but we try to meet on 2-week intervals. And then if we, if a session runs long, or we didn't cover everything, or not everyone got a turn on review, we'll throw in an additional session midweek. I have to say the virtual strategy enable a lot of flexibility there. So it's 8 sessions over the course of the 14-week term. The workflow is driven by core competency. So you're going to see the roadmap in a minute, but it sort of builds off each other, right? When you lock in your targets, that's going to better enable you to build a strong brand strategy. Strong brand strategy is going to enable you to be a better networker and build out your network more effectively. Building out that network more effectively is going to lead to better sourcing quality opportunities. Better sourcing, and you can see where that goes. So it's an idea of a flow. Get into that flow. And if you haven't sort of mastered that particular module, you have a team to help you get really comfortable and make you stronger. And then maybe I want additional coaching. So also, participants in the JSAG got more students into my office, though I didn't lack one-on-one requests, but it did get them more into my office for higher impact meetings to solve some of these challenges that we're having. So it really worked out there as well. Make session adjustments based on student need. Like I said, we have sort of an agenda that we want to cover that week. But if the students were saying, hey, we really want to, there's times when I spent 3 sessions on the LinkedIn profile because they just really wanted to bang that out. And so what we do is we just make up for that. Maybe we'd have a virtual session midweek to kind of tackle resume, but maybe they were really interested in spending, multiple sessions on the LinkedIn profile. So I just go with the student need. We have a basic structure, but I would also kind of meet them where they needed to be. Each core competency would build off the other. All right. And then, of course, the WhatsApp groups would help quite a bit for just-in-time support, as I mentioned. All right, well, here's the roadmap. So like I said, this foundationally, we'd start with targeting, branding, and relationship building. So as I was saying earlier, if your targets are valid, you build a brand around those targets, you build better quality relationships amongst our alumni, better enabling you to source opportunities. Then how do you sort of transmit all this? How do you kind of draw traffic to you? Your LinkedIn profile syncs very nicely with the resume. So now I've built these core competencies. Now we can really get into the tactics, the application tactic, the not just applying for a job, but looking at that job as a case process. What alumni do I know in the organization? What alumni from previous companies do I know are in the organization? Getting them very comfortable with not thinking about just communicating with recruiters, but communicating with decision makers and marketing their brand to those decision makers and building relationships with decision makers in target companies prior to an open job. So they've got the contacts. Then we get into practice interviews. We do mocks internally, but one other thing we do during the mocks is we would bring in, me and the consultant that I bring in, a lot of relationships in Silicon Valley with recruiters from top companies. So we'd have them come in as guests to mock interview our students in the JSAG. And then finally, we'd cap it with probably our most popular program to end it is our salary negotiation program, which we record and actually use that for the whole class on salary negotiation. And so all builds off, one core competency builds off the other. And this is a lot to that structure where I talked about earlier, that students just really love. They love having a game plan. Timeline, when is it offered? Well, they know it's coming in the second year. We start in term 4, which is build up to right around on-campus recruiting season. So it's kind of an alternative to on-campus recruiting. What we do is, if you're going to do on-campus recruiting, so that's a full-time process in itself that we have to coach them on. We say, do on-campus recruiting. And if that doesn't work out, you can jump into a JSAG in term 6 in the spring of your graduation. But we don't want them to really double dip. We want to focus on it as 2 separate processes. Again, 8 weeks, 14-week period, meeting on 2-week intervals, virtual sessions in between, one-on-one coaching, assess progress over that 14-week time frame. Let's get to switchers. So again, that was another factor on that list that I talked to you about is, switchers need that additional support, and this provided that. Most of our participants in the JSAG, you're going to see in a minute, I have some stats. A lot of our students are very successful at their job search individually or just through one-on-one coaching and individual enterprise process. They're fine with it. They don't necessarily feel the need to be part of the team. The ones that, and they're mostly people that are sort of moving up vertically, looking at that promotion, starting a company, what have you. most of the people that are attracted to the JSAG products are the switchers. That I want to change my career function. I'm an engineer. I want to get into, strategy or product management. I'm in product management. I want to move into M&A, something like that. People that want to kind of move functionally, or I want to change industries. I'm in semiconductors and I want to get into software. I'm in software. I want to get into, I want to get more into fintech, things like that. So this is a nice refuge for our switchers. And why is that so important? Because a lot of in switching, maybe there's already a member of the group that's already in that space that can kind of help me through it and kind of guide me. Now you would think, well, they're classmates, so they should be doing this on their own. But because they're so busy, and especially in this virtual world, they don't always get together now. And they have very busy weekends when they're on campus with academics. So they don't always have time to kind of come together informally and work on this stuff. This program creates a space for that, and they love it. So industry switch support, career function switch support, and also leadership support. So we won't want to knock that. We have a lot of more senior people that will be in the program, looking at maybe their senior directors or directors looking to move into the VP level, and they're sort of coaching our middle managers. And so I've seen that. So I've seen some people kind of step up as leaders in the program that have large teams. And when sometimes the gap is, I want to move to the director level, but I just haven't had a lot of management experience. And you have people that have had a lot of dynamic management. We'll coach them on, here's how you package what you have. It's not necessarily about headcount, it's responsibility, it's what you own. And it's just gold when you hear that coming from student to student, not just me, the coach. Somebody just sit back and listen to it. It's like magic. So it's really awesome to see them support each other like that. And then in terms of brands, we're working with some of the top brands. Again, some of these top brands are represented in our guest speakers that we read, our guest mock interviewers, but also the target companies. So when the students say, well, I'm not going to have access to these great brands unless I do on-campus recruiting. Well, no, you're going to have the same access through this process. Now, there's a couple other side programs that I just will mention that I do, and that is we have a thing called the Hiring Collective, where we sort of bring in, it's really company information sessions, but it's sort of these one-off info sessions where we identify alumni in these top companies that will come to campus. Sometimes, back in the day, they were doing it physically. Now they're doing it virtually. So that sort of represents those information sessions from these top brands. We also, in the past, sort of did a partner sort of executive level recruiting event with some of these top companies, with some of our, like Berkeley, Haas, and Stanford. I'm not sure we're going to be doing that in the near future because we can't physically come to campus to do that. But there were other programs that sort of augmented, sort of replicated a recruiting process that were more focused on senior people. But my point is, the main point is, our target brands are right in there. So the students didn't feel like they're missing out on these target brands. And then, of course, I think the most valuable piece of this whole thing is the group support, peer review, feedback, sharing, guidance, accolades. Let me stop for a second. I have a chat question that I want to jump on here. Have you found hiring to be more challenging during the pandemic? It was, I would say, right last summer into early fall, but things sort of, really picked up. We were talking about yesterday, sort of the K recovery. Yeah, I totally related to that because in the Valley, we just saw things pick up around, right around fall, November, October, November, and things have just been moving in a great clip. Now, the numbers are a little more modest for my graduating class because I think they kind of were right in the thick of it. But for my new class, hiring is looking good. So to answer your question is, I wouldn't say it's at the same levels as, pre-pandemic, but it's pretty solid. We're doing pretty well, at sort of, directors, senior managers, always a huge demand. It depends on what you're trying to do. Product management is huge in our marketplace. Business development, huge in our marketplace. So a lot depends on what you're trying to do and what types of companies you're targeting, but all like the brands I mentioned have been pretty hiring pretty, I wouldn't say aggressively, but consistently. So the support and accolades is so important around pitch. Let's hear your brand pitch. We sit around and we share our brand pitches, and it's great when I don't have to be the main critique, when I have students critiquing it. It's almost like I gave them a script. They're critiquing exactly what I want them to critique, and it's wonderful. Let's look at your LinkedIn profile as a group. Let's review your resume as a group. Let's mock interview with outside people, but all your peers. Let's working on your networking and sourcing strategy. Hey, you should be talking to this person. Think about this person. When you get that informational interview, maybe should be your approach. Maybe you should want to think about these things or these types of questions. Expectations and targets is huge, right? We will have, I'm a chief product officer. Here's an engineer trying to get into product. And to say, look, I want to help you adjust your expectations. You're not going to go from engineer semiconductors right out to go work at Google as a product manager right away. That's going to be a tough move for you. Here's what you face in trying to do that. Here are some steps in between that you want to think about. Here's preparation you want to think about. When that's coming from another student, so powerful. So that's great. They will call each other out on the investment of time. Hey, to Barb's question a minute ago, hey, I haven't seen you in 3 sessions. How do you expect to be where you need to be if you don't show up to these meetings? It's not me saying that. It's another student saying that. So that's awesome when that comes from other students. And of course, encouragement and celebration. When somebody comes to report, hey, I just got to the finals over here. Everybody rallies behind that person to kind of make sure they're going to nail that final and celebrates that they made this progress. And giving encouragement to people that kind of feel stuck, that aren't advancing. Why aren't you advancing? Let's look at this as a team without judgment and provide you that support. So it really, like I said, I don't mean to be too romantic about it, but it really is magical. And for them just not feeling alone in this process. A lot of our students feel a lot of pressure that they have to, be upwardly mobile. They put a lot of peer pressure on one another. And we try to stay away from that in these groups and be more about support and reminding them that time is on their side. Our students do really well post-graduation. Not all of them are going to get an offer by graduation, but this is going to give them the tools to help drive that offer post-graduation. So we remind them of that. So I think the key, the group support is just so valuable in this process. Accountability. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, about 60% of them are very consistent. Most are, will show up to, maybe, 6 out of the 8 sessions, 5 out of the 8 sessions, but they'll come back. If they had a good experience, they'll come. Very few feel like they had a bad experience. There's check-ins on status, like I was saying earlier, progress reporting, observing the progress of others. And you sort of say, hey, this person's kind of, again, not to put peer pressure, but hey, if this person's, I'm seeing them, I kind of, move forward, that kind of motivates them to put more time and effort into it. Taking a leadership role, there's sort of, it's kind of like, I want to make the Lord of the Flies comparison, but you see in any kind of micro group, there's leaders emerge, and there's you see the little sort of micro relationships that kind of like their study groups. So it's the JSAG group, kind of has that group dynamics, and certain people emerge as leaders and more support. Some people will, be sort of support from behind, and maybe they're not as vocal, but they're really helping out on a lot of the materials. But it's interesting to kind of see that dynamic play out. There's a time sensitivity factor. Hey, I've got a meeting coming up. And granted, I don't try to put too much pressure. They have, academics come first, of course. Job comes after that, or it should be job and academics. But there is some sort of time sensitivity. Like, hey, I've got a meeting coming up. This is what we're going to cover. This is what I'm going to be talking about. Have I updated my LinkedIn profile? Have I updated my resume? What does my pitch look like? And what do I have to report? And I'll encourage them, if you're not ready, I want you to come anyway. We're not going to chastise you. But there's that motivator that there's, they do have some accountability there. Sharing ideas around time management, how you pull this off. When do you work on this? Because that's a challenge such a challenge for our students, is when do we find time for the career stuff? And so some students have it down, they have a system down that they can share on what works for them, whether it's late at night, early in the morning, or they find time in the middle of the day. But it's nice to, at least when they're in class on the weekends, that this is allotted time where they can focus on this. And of course, like I said earlier, curriculum. So we created the Job Search Manifesto, which, by the way, is on June 15th. You can buy on Amazon. You can actually pre-order it today. The Kindle version you can pre-order today, and then we have the paperback version. It's going to be available June 15th. But sort of Mike Minosky and I sort of adapted a curriculum for this program over the last, since we started it. And and sort of turned into a book that we have out there. So the students work with the Job Search Manifesto and the chapters, the different sections I had on a prior slide. So just kind of a breakdown of how my students from class 38 to 45 have found new jobs. 35, still the majority of them will go, will do the enterprise job. They'll, work with me on one-on-one coaching. Some of them don't go through one-on-one coaching. A good 75% of the students overall will have at least 1 to 2 coaching appointments. A lot of them will just do the executive coaching that we do. Like I mentioned, in the second year, they get 6 sessions of that. So a good 35% of them will change that way. Question. Just jump on that. Okay. Share the link. Oh, thank you, Barbara. Thanks. About 32% will do the JSAG process. And if you notice that most of the people in the JSAG are switchers, so that's kind of the switcher group will do JSAG, the sort of executive vertical mobility group. I want to stay in my lane and move up. We'll kind of, do it the individual way and, get the one-on-one coaching from their executive coach or me. Small percent, about 3% will still change through on-campus recruiting. So there's a few that will do that. Demographically, we do have some students that are under 10 years of experience. Might have 8 years of experience, have a lot of military background. It's a lot of our ex-military, our veterans will kind of migrate to that process. They're really comfortable with it. And, a lot of the on-campus recruiting companies are attracted to that kind of background. So, that's fine. They'll do, I'll let them into JSAG once they've completed on-campus recruiting, fine. And then still a good 30% of our students, aren't looking to make a change while they're in the program. They want to focus on their job and academics. Some of them, are trying, but just aren't successful by graduation. Now, these numbers I have here are the 2 years they're in the program up until graduation. I don't have a chart here, but I did a survey about 5 years ago, and by a year, 6 months to a year post-graduation, we have like a 98% success rate in career change. So a lot of students, there's just too much on their plate while they're in the program, and they'll make that change after. But I think a lot of the tools they get from the JSAG process or they get from the career team while they're here enable that. We like to feel that way, right, Don? So that's a breakdown of how our students change. And yeah, any questions? I'm done. About 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, we got somebody raising their hand. Feel free to unmute if you want. I'm fine with that. It's 40 people, it should be fine. You want to see my kitten? Hi, Diane. I can hear you clicking.
You did unmute you. Thank you so much. Sorry, it said at first it said I wasn't allowed to unmute. So this is really great. This is super interesting. I have a sort of a specific question. I work in career services with graduate students, and I work specifically with one master's program in which I think a lot of the students come to the program because it's interesting, right? Like the things that they're learning are interesting, but they also want to do something new. But they often don't know what that new thing is. And they come to me thinking that I'm like, okay, so I got this degree, what can I do? Of which there's no specific answer. So what I'm wondering is, so this seems like a great training ground in which you can give people the skills in which they can figure this out. Do you feel like you've sort of seen less of that? I mean, you're dealing with a different kind of student that I'm dealing with. I tend to be younger, not have as much experience, but do you feel like people who go through this program recognize that they can figure this out themselves as opposed to looking to you as like this person who has an answer?
Yeah, I do. I think they come out of this program much more empowered. And I think a lot of it has to do with curriculum and structure and feedback. I mean, I would say in that order, having the support from their peers, not only just me. So to your point, it takes a little pressure off me to be the one. Now, I'm not going to say my students don't do that, especially in the first year. And Dawn's going to talk about that coming up next when she talks about her book Switchers, because, we have a lot of our students that want to make these switches, and they love to come and sit in our office and say, what should I do? Here's what I want to do. Tell me how to do it, right?
Where should I work? Who wants me?
Yeah, exactly, right. And our job, is to say, well, we got to empower you to figure this out, right? And so there's that whole discovery process, which is could be another presentation of that first year of discovery we go through. But I feel like the job search action group process also helps them validate that targeting through, here's material, here's curriculum, and also I'm getting feedback from my peers in addition to Steve. And also we're kind of validating a lot of that external data that we're collecting. So the short answer to your question is yes, I feel like by the time they get through this program, they're less reliant on Steve telling me what to do. A lot of it becomes, which is wonderful. Now when we have meetings post JSAG, it's, hey, here's what I'm doing. What do you think? Or this isn't really working, getting that result. Why do you think it's not getting that result? Sort of changes the language.
Which is a question that you can probably be helpful with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the short answer is yes. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the question. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, that was you. All right. I saw some other. Any other questions? Okay.
So
okay.
One other thing I wanted to add, Steve.
Don Graham. That's Don Graham.
That I find that is helpful with this process is, well, two things that are related. One, it helps them to learn the process of the job search. And I often find that years later, students come back and they remember what they learned and what they learned from not just us, but from one another. And they feel really equipped to do a job search in the future. So I just wanted to throw that out as an added benefit. It's not unusual for students to come back 3, 4, 5, 10 years later to say, I used everything from the JSAG in my next job search. And that was one of the most useful courses that I took at Wharton.
Yeah, thank you, Don, for saying that. And I don't want to pat ourselves on the back on that. I mean, I had a presentation. I brought in some alumni to talk about search funds recently, and it was a session on what is a search fund and search funds 101. And he'd gone through the JSAG process, and you don't necessarily go through this process to get into a search fund, but he just he wasn't sure what he wanted. He was actually looking at product management. He ended up in a search fund, but he made this great comment, and he said, all this stuff is real. He said, one thing I learned that helped me in the search fund and marketing and presenting my brand and pitching and validating my targets, like who's going to be the right target. A lot of those tools I got from this process. And so he told the students, he's like, this is real. You will use this stuff when post Wharton. So it was really powerful to hear him say that. So thanks for that comment, Don. All right, we have a question from Joseph. Do you anticipate having to change any part of this within the next 5 years, given some of the rapid changing? Yes, absolutely. And I'm kind of don't even want to think about it right now, but yeah, we have to stay on top of it. I think if you read through the manifesto, I think it's going to be pretty valid. But you're right. As the market changes, as we look at, a lot of people are coming back to work in Silicon Valley, probably more than I thought. But nonetheless, there are a lot of people who came up in the conversation yesterday. They're going to be moving to different parts of the country, having these virtual relationships, having virtual career mobility, more, national and international job search to look at. We have to factor in culture. I mean, so there's a lot of variables. I think that this method is a very strong foundation, but absolutely we're going to and we did it with sort of the view of our marketplace. This is kind of more of a Silicon Valley. Now, I think Dawn has taken this and adapted it to her students on the East Coast. And we kind of do that. And again, I think that this provides you a good template. But Joseph, absolutely. This is something we're going to continue to update in. And I think that that's part of our job as career directors and coaches, is to be on top of that and really know our marketplace very well to make these adjustments. Let's see, we have another question here. Okay, I'm going to be wrapping up, got my 5-minute warning. It'd be wonderful to do with undergraduate students. Often I find that we throw them a lot, but not necessarily understand the bigger picture. I often have to explain again and again before. Yes, absolutely. That's really interesting on, so I guess I kind of put that out to you, that those of you that work with undergraduates, Dawn and I are often very surprised at how unsophisticated even our graduate students are when it comes to networking and job search, a lot of them it's sort of like, they've sort of been siloed in this one career path for so long. They're not sure what that external market looks like. I imagine with a lot of undergraduate students, like seeing that bigger picture is a challenge. I think this process, especially on the front end targeting and networking strategy, really helps them a lot. So I think it'd be wonderfully applicable, but I can't really comment because I don't work with undergraduate students. But certainly I think a lot of our experienced 10-year executive students are surprisingly unsophisticated sometimes when it comes to this. I don't know, what do you think, Dawn?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that was I came here about 7 years ago and I thought, what can I teach someone who's already had multiple careers? And the fact is that when you think about how they got those jobs and how they progressed in their jobs, they really hadn't done a true job search. So it was very much either recruited right out of school, or they were recruited by somebody they had worked for previously. And so when they wanted to make a major switch, or they wanted to do something that was kind of outside their comfort zone or current circle, it was interesting how little they knew about the job search process. And of course, that's not all their fault. The job search process is changing so rapidly that even if they had a successful job search 10 years ago, it looks so different now.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to wrap up with one final comment that I don't think I did appropriately. To point out that, one of the main things I'm trying to make, and I think this slide sort of represents it. So, I mean, many of you, work with students where on-campus recruiting is probably the main focus of job change, or you're working with graduate students, postdocs, where it's more of an individual process. What I'd like to think is this is an opportunity to kind of create a middle process, right? So you have the individual process and more of that enterprise process. And then on the other end, you have a very structured on-campus recruiting process. I feel like this offers this middle alternative. So now we have 3 options for our students. So just wanted you to think about that. Do I want to create sort of this hybrid it's still individual, it's still tailored, but there's a structure and I can kind of make adjustments depending on the needs of my students. So that's the key takeaway that I was hoping to convey to you. So I want to thank all of you for your time. And you're going to see me again in a few minutes, along with my colleague, Dawn, in the next presentation.